Jeremy Leggett, founding director of Solar Century and founding director of Solar Aid, and a long time standing friend and mentor and inspiration. Thank you very much for an interview for Restored Earth.
My pleasure.
Jeremy, I wanted to ask you about the solar energy cause and the renewable energy cause. You and I were both at the Paris Agreement. You've written a wonderful book about Paris and the lead up to it. How optimistic are you that we're going to be able to meet the world's energy demands through renewables, in particular solar?
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic that we can do that and do it in time to be there or thereabouts with the agreements that were made in Paris. And that optimism really is rooted in the fact that there are tech trends at work. So there's policy, of course, as well, but fundamentally there's been enough historical policy making that now the markets have taken over. Exponential trends are happening in the technologies that we want to see come to the fore if we're going to achieve deep cuts and indeed decarbonisation consistent with the Paris Agreement. And that now involves spectacular cost down in those technologies. So while all that's happening, the incumbent technologies, of course, are suffering a vast catalogue of problems, including cost up, for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part. And that's what my optimism is rooted in. Of course, it's all set in a wider context, and there are things that can derail it, especially geopolitical factors. But yeah, that's my position. Cautious optimism.
Fantastic, Jeremy. And of course 2015 was remarkable. The Paris Agreement was an amazing achievement, and in your book you argue very convincingly that there's really been nothing like it ever before in terms of the scale of political commitment that was made and so on. And then suddenly 2016 happened, and then suddenly of course Mr. Trump was elected, and suddenly a lot of this good legislation that was made by Mr. Obama looks under threat. Does this risk derailing a lot of what's happening in the US, or is that sort of inexorable what's happening in the US?
Well, of course it's a setback. There's no question about that. But it's not as big a setback as Mr. Trump and his equivalents on this side of the Atlantic would like. And the two reasons for that are what I mentioned earlier, the tech trends that are at work. So, for example, Trump digs coal and he wants to put the coal miners back to work. He's got the small problem that there are more than 3 million people working in clean energy in America and less than 50,000 coal industry employees. It seems incredible almost unbelievable when you recite the statistics and compare them to the sort of political pressure and rah-rah that goes on. But in any event, if Mr. Trump wants to increase those 50,000 working in coal, he'll have to defy economics, because coal is no longer cheaper than solar for new power plants, and that's really his second problem. So the growth of the clean energy technologies and the workforces that operate in them increasingly, and the economics, and he's going to fail. But the worry, of course, this is where the geopolitics comes in. The man is a demagogue, and he aspires to be a despot. And this isn't me speaking. This is what many people on both sides of the Atlantic believe. And we all know what aspiring despots tend to do when they're under pressure. And that's the real worry, that we'll be plunged into some clueless war or series of wars that will derail so much of the good things that are being done in the multilateral arena generally, and particularly with climate.
Thank you, Jeremy. A sobering thought. You're also chair of Carbon Tracker Initiative, that's done so much to draw the world's attention to this concept of stranded assets and unburnable carbon. And I wanted to ask your view on whether you feel the financial markets have fully woken up to this idea that we simply can't burn or can't consume the majority of the world's remaining oil and gas reserves if we're to keep within 2 degrees?
No, they haven't. They're very resistant still, but the hopeful thing is that significant corners of the financial markets have woken up, and that is a force that can very easily become amplified, self-amplify. And so we have institutions that have woken up. We have the regulator led by the Bank of England, regulators led by the Bank of England, and so there's a head of steam there. And so much of everything we're dealing with in climate is non-linear. It's exponential often, and I think there's a real potential for this to become exponential. But right now, if you go to most of the financial institutions and talk to the analysts in energy, you'll find that they don't know or don't care much about climate change. They haven't heard of carbon tracker, and it's still pretty much in the domain of the ESG heads of ESG and ESG analysts. But it's a fast-moving drama, and I fully expect it to snowball. And of course, the great thing about working with financial institutions is we all know they have a propensity for a herd instinct, and when something really begins to take off, then everyone piles in that same direction. And I expect to see that in the next few years. And this is one of the great risks for the energy incumbents who seek to remain locked into their status quo. There's huge risk it's just going to simply evaporate on them very, very quickly.
Thank you. Could you describe some of the really inspiring things that are happening around the world? you do in your book, some of the incredible stuff that's happening in Silicon Valley and some of the solar installations in the US and in China and elsewhere. I'd love to sort of draw you out on 2 or 3 examples of where you've seen things which are, oh my God, the world is changing before my eyes.
It's almost unfair to pick on particular examples, because in the very nature of this, that there are no magic bullets. There are no. It's a wall of change, not always made up of spectacular single instances. So, what can I pluck from the air from my own experience? I've in my own company, Solar Century, I've watched young. I'm not a technologist myself. I come from, as you know, from a geological background. Essentially, I was a creature of the oil and gas industry in my first career. But I formed a tech company, and so am surrounded by engineers and technologists. And it's been wonderful watching them ride this cost-down curve. And one of the things that we love in Solar Century and have tried to specialise in is residential solar roofing. And we design our own products and outsource manufacture them. And the first product we had back in 2005, 2006 was a very nice looking roof tile, impossibly expensive, nowhere near to competitive. And that was value engineered, as the technologists say, so that the cost came down. And there's a narrative through to the present day where we have a very aesthetic solar roof tile, a sort of mega tile, a large tile, which you can install essentially for the same price as bolt-on modules, and that really is part of the roof. And I remember along the way that at one point one of the roof tiles was no longer made with an aluminium frame, but reinforced plastic, and the price of that whole frame was the same as the paint job on the metal first product. So you see them innovating that way. You see them innovating with plug and play. This thing clicks together like a Lego set, and you can install it in literally minutes once they're up on the roof. And that, of course, brings the cost down as well. So it's not just about the silicon, the semiconductor technology. So that would be one thing, personal experience of the ride down the cost experience curve, as the technologists call it. in solar. Similarly in Africa with Solar Aid, with the solar lighting that we sell through our retail brand and not-for-profit retail brand, Sunny Money. When we started out, we were retailing solar lights north of $15, and that's an almost impossible ask for people on $1 a day, less than $1 a day. But now we're down, we can retail the latest entry-level product that gets people into the base of the pyramid at $5. And so, that's a lot more affordable, and especially when people can see that if they shell out for one of these things, they get their money back within weeks on the deferred cost of kerosene. So in microcosm, we're literally knocking out a whole category of oil use, as kerosene in lighting. And that's been wonderful to see as well. So these are two solar examples, but there are many other examples. Electric vehicles, during the period that I describe in the book, they've gone from almost nowhere to the point now where we have 27 companies about to hit the streets of California with fully autonomous, driverless electric vehicles. And this is science fiction, and it's happening at the speed of light, really.
Amazing. Johan Roxman just published a new paper which argues for a sort of Moore's law for carbon, and argues that to meet the Paris Agreement, that the sort of drop in emissions that we require is of an even greater order of magnitude in the short term than we perhaps understood. But he also argues it's doable. But I wondered, in your sort of mental map of the global energy system, where it is today vis-a-vis where it needs to be in the next 20, 30, 40 years, how you cut the numbers. What sort of transition do you foresee, and what role is there for other energies, natural gas, nuclear, etc.?
Yeah, I'm more in the camp that places faith in going with the flow and hoping to trigger these exponential effects, because we know that that exponential effects are in operation, and very few people understand. I think this is not an arrogant thing to say, it's just an observation that and it's very difficult for analysts. Analysts think in linear, straight lines. They project into the future, and they tend to use straight lines to do so, and reality is rarely like that. And so solar is a very good example. There was virtually no solar. It was in 2000 around the world, and the amount of solar has doubled 7 times since. And okay, we're still down at low single digits in terms of global electricity. But if you double it another 6 times, and what's to stop that happening, every 2 years, the way the first 7 did, if you double that another 6 times, you are providing all the energy the world currently uses. That's how steep the exponential effect goes. So, this is the kind of thing, I think, that it's worth trying to work in different ways to trigger or bring forward those exponential effects. It's not to say I don't have a lot of respect for the people who do all the modelling and try and sort of think it through country by country, sector by sector, and do all the analytical grind. And when they do that, the numbers tend not to be that daunting. It's sort of percentage points per year. We have to increase energy. I can't remember them, but it's a few percentage points a year of increase in energy efficiency, a few percentage points of penetration of certain clean energy technologies, and you could do it. You can then get to very quickly to a world of modern economies run in a totally decarbonised way in the time frame required by Paris. Now, of course, all that ignores the pushback, the fight back by the incumbency, which is, I think, getting increasingly gritty. As I get told off for, I had too many toy soldiers when I was a small boy, and I can't help thinking of all this in terms of military analogies. And I think of the Second World War. and what it was like for my parents' generation, in the summer of 1940. Everything looked hopeless. And lo and behold, by 1945, victorious Allied armies were sweeping through Europe and the Far East en route to victory.